So I am going to, so we are now officially recording, just so everybody knows. I am also going to share my screen and get to the right one. All right, can you guys all see my screen? For some reason, when I shared my screen, I lost you guys. I'm going to stop it and see why. I should be able to see both at the same time. So now I'm going to look really stupid on the recording, but that's okay. Full screen. Why did I lose you guys there? All right, let me try again. Katarina, do you know why on Zoom it would be different when you share the screen?
I'm not that good with Zoom.
Oh, there, got you back. Hang on, I think I figured it out. There we go. I've got a side by side, so now I can see you guys and my screen at the same time. Are you guys able to see my screen? Do you see the slides that says assessment of functional living skills? Yes, okay, super. So you guys can unmute and ask questions at any time during this presentation. You don't have to wait until the end. So if you're, you know, if you have a question or whatever, feel free to just jump in. You guys, most of you guys know me well enough to know that my trainings are usually pretty informal. So just jump in if you have comments or questions. So most of you know, and Katarina, please correct me if I'm wrong, that there are classrooms, Kristen, you were part of the pilot, but that there are classrooms that have been piloting the ACE curriculum. And I believe that the goal is that by sometime next year, all the classrooms would be using the ACE curriculum, which is the Autism Curriculum Encyclopedia. So some classes have already been piloting it. The pilot's been going well. I believe that the goal is to then roll it out next year to everyone. So part of that process, as well as just the general IEP process, is that we should be conducting assessments prior to writing IEPs. And I think over the past couple of years, there's been a little bit of drift in terms of conducting assessments prior to writing IEPs. Some people are doing it well, some people aren't. There's sort of been a little bit of a drift in terms of which assessments to use. Some people are still using the Brigance, some people are using the BAM, some people might be using ABLS, some people might be using AFLS. So the training today is on how to do the AFLS assessment if that's one that you choose to do. So Katarina, please jump in. Is it still going to be that the teachers would decide which assessment to use at IEP time, or is it going to be more prescribed that they have to do a particular assessment?
Probably we'll go with AFLS. I don't know why it's doing it. Yes, we'll go probably with AFLS.
Okay, I can hear you. It's just a little muffled. So more than likely, so the AFLS, which is what you're going to be learning about today, is the one that's probably most closely associated with the ACE curriculum. So my guess is, and I think what Katarina was just saying, was that we would probably prefer that you do the AFLS. But again, that's a discussion that will probably be happening down the road. So So the point of today's training is just to show you how to conduct the AFLS assessment. In a couple of weeks, there will be an ICT, and maybe we'll have some of these answers better by then, but in a couple of weeks, you guys all have an ICT, and we'll talk more about, now that you know how to conduct the AFLS, what do you do with that information and how do you use that information? So the focus of today, you can see on this first slide that it's part one of the AFLS training. So AFLS, AFLS, some people say AFLS, it stands for the Assessment of Functional Living Skills. So the assessment itself, there's actually 6 different parts to the assessment. And I'll show you on the next slide. So it's an assessment tool to help determine which functional living skills our learners have. It can help you guide in selecting some goals for the IEP. There are actually 6 different assessment protocols. So there's a general guidebook, and then there are 6 different assessment protocols. There's a basic living skills protocol, there's a home skills, a community participation skills, independent living skills, school skills, and voc skills. So depending on your students, depending on whether you have older or younger, higher functioning or lower functioning, you would choose which of these assessments that you might decide to do. You might choose to do bits and pieces from different assessments. So if you know your student has strong basic living skills, but poor voc skills, then maybe you only do the vocational skills protocol. So that's something that, again, you would have to kind of look through. So my understanding, and again, Katarina, let me know if this is accurate. I believe there's only 1 or 2 full sets of these assessments right now, but we have ordered more and we're getting more. The training that we're going to show you today, what we did was we took all of these protocols and we developed an electronic grid system so that you don't have to have the booklet to complete the assessment. There's a way that you can do it all electronically, and I'm going to show you that today. But the first couple of times you do the assessment, it's really helpful to have the actual booklet to kind of look through it and have all the information. The electronic version that we're going to show you is really sort of a condensed version. So within the next few weeks, if you get a chance, and I'm not sure when the full set's going to come in, but if you get the opportunity to look through some of these, it'll make more sense for you guys. So each of the protocols, this is the basic living skills one, has inside, you guys are probably already familiar with doing the Brigance and some other assessments, but inside there are lots of different items that you would assess. So item 1 might be, can the individual pull up their pants? Item 2 might be, can the individual tie a tie? Whatever, I'm obviously making stuff up. So there are pages and pages of skills that you're going to be going through and assessing. And again, we converted all of this to an electronic version, so you don't have to have this, but it's helpful to have this the first couple of times. Are any of you familiar with the ABLS, the Assessment of Basic Living Skills? So this is very similar to that, but it's much more focused on daily functional living skills. So there's a scoring grid in each of the books as well, and you would color in the grid based on the results of your assessment. And again, we converted this so that it's electronic now, so you don't have to have the paper grid. But the first few times that you do the assessment, I think the paper grid kind of gives you a little bit more information and it helps you understand it a little bit more. It will take some practice on your part, and we're going to give you guys opportunities to practice that as well. Any questions so far? Okay. So again, this slide sort of breaks down those 6 different protocols, those 6 different areas, and kind of tells you at a glance which skills are covered under each of those protocols. So you can see under basic living skills, that's going to be assessing things like basic communication, dressing, toileting, grooming. The community protocol is going to assess things like shopping, money use, using the phone, telling time. The school skills one, assesses things like social skills, technology, common knowledge, etc. So you can just kind of see at a glance the types of skills that each one assesses, so that when you're determining which assessment you're going to do, this is a good resource page. And I'm going to share all of these slides with you guys in a little bit so that you'll have these to refer back to. So again, if you just look at this page, you can say, well, I want to assess Johnny's dressing skills. Well, then use the basic living skills tool. If you want to look at, Johnny's money management, you might either use the community participation one or the independent living one, because you can see that money management is a skill that's involved in both of those. So again, there'll be a little bit more guidance from the teacher leads in terms of which assessment tools to use, but you basically can pick and choose what's going to suit you and your students' needs best. So again, each page of the guide looks like this, and we've converted it to the slide here. So you can see that we've taken like that top row and we've blown it up for you so you can see what it looks like. So this is question 1 from the basic living skills assessment, and it talks about, it's assessing aggression. So that top row is just question 1. So you can see in each row, it'll have SM1, which means self-management, question 1. You can see that there's a place for a score. They would get a score of either a 0, a 1, or a 2. The task name or the skill being assessed is aggression towards others. Then there's questions like, does the learner demonstrate physical aggression toward others? And then you can see that over here, there's criteria. So if they have no physical aggression towards others, they would get a score of a 2. If they have occasional aggression in predictable settings or situations, they would get a score of 1. If they demonstrate frequent aggression in a variety of settings, they would get a score of 0. So each row has the skill being assessed. It gives you the criteria of how to score it. And then again, if you were using the paper version, you would just circle the 0, the 1, or the 2, and then you would go back and fill it in on the grid. We've created that electronic version, so you would still give them a score of 0, 1, or 2, but you're going to fill it in on the electronic grid. And there will be directions toward the end of the slides to show you how to do that. So that's just sort of a basic, and it's the same thing for each question on the assessment. Okay. So when the grid, again, when you have the grid, you're going to fill it in. You're going to shade in the boxes based on the score that you give them. These are designed that you can do the assessment for. You can use the same grid 4 years in a row. So the first year that you do the assessment, you would shade in your scores using the blue color. The second year, you would shade in using the purple color. The third year, you would shade in using the green color. So that theoretically, you'll be able to see progress year after year by the color of what's shaded in on the grid and how many boxes. The more boxes that are shaded in, the more skills that student has. So at a glance, you can see, well, geez, here's a whole bunch of unshaded boxes, means they don't have these skills. So maybe those are where I should focus my teaching. So when it's completed, you don't necessarily need to have the specifics, but you can just sort of at a glance see. So just at a glance on this one, I can see that the student has some pretty good dressing skills because there's a lot of boxes shaded in, but really poor communication skills because there's a lot of unshaded boxes. Does that make sense? Okay. And again, we're going to get into the details of how to do that in a little bit. So again, you'll need to have the grid to complete the assessment, and you can either do the electronic grid, which is what we would prefer, but you could do the paper grid for now if you want to use that to practice. Again, you may want to have the guidebook handy the first couple of times you go through the assessment, but you don't have to. You can do it just with the electronic grid. But you can see on this slide is kind of what I already said. So the electronic version only has the sections that are highlighted in yellow here. It doesn't have everything. So if you want to be able to see everything and get used to it the first few times you do it, you would want to use the booklet, because not everything from the booklet was able to be put on the electronic version. Okay. So again, this is broken down into a smaller section. So on the grid itself, let me get a blank grid. Again, there's like, the columns for each of the areas in the questions. This just shows you like the very first one down here. So SM stands for self-management. And you can see that there's SM1, SM2, SM3, question 1, question 2, question 3. Some questions, that the score might be a 0, a 1, or a 2. There may be other questions where you can get anywhere from a 0 to a 4. So depending on the question and the criteria for scoring is going to depend on how many boxes get shaded in. All right, so again, on the electronic version, it would look like this. So you would go to the box, you would hover over the square, and that's where the criteria will pop up. So if you hover over the first square, it'll tell you a 1 means it demonstrates occasional aggression in a very predictable setting or situation. If you hover over the second square, it'll tell you a score of 2 means they have no physical aggressions toward others. So when I send you the electronic grid and you open it up, you'll be able to see that you just hover over and the question and the criteria score just pops up for you. So again, you could do this without the booklet. So if they get a score of a 2, you would shade in both boxes. If they got a score of a 1, you would only shade in one box. If they got a score of 0, you would shade in the little circle next to the box. And that's what this right here again is showing you. So if your learner only exhibits aggression by kicking the teacher in class when presented with work, like it's very predictable and it's only occasional, they would get a score of 1. So if you were using the paper version, you would circle the 1. But if you're using the electronic version, you would just shade in the first box with the color blue. Next year, you would fill it in with the color purple. So again, every year it's going to be different. So here's again, if you were doing the paper version, this is a page that shows you the first 5 questions. So on question 1, they got a score of 1. On question 2, they got a score of 0. On question 3, a score of 1. On question 4, a score of 2. And on question 5, a score of 2. So again, on the paper version, you would just circle it. But then when you fill in the grid, you would fill it in according to that. So again, question 1 got a score of 1. 1 box is shaded. Question 2 got a score of 0, only the little circle is shaded. Question 3, a score of 1, just 1 box is shaded. Question 4, a score of 2, 2 boxes are shaded, and so on. So you can see how that corresponds with the score that you're giving them. Does that make sense? Okay. The easiest and the best way to complete the assessment, you kind of have two options. You can either give them a score based on your knowledge of them and their skills, or you could ask people who know them well. You could interview them and ask them those questions, or sometimes you might want to directly assess it. So obviously aggression is something that you wouldn't directly assess. You would have to ask people, how often does aggression occur? If you don't know them, you would ask the caregivers, their staff, whatever, in order to give them a score. But if it's something like tying a tie and you're not really sure and nobody's really sure, you might directly assess it by testing it, giving them the tie and seeing if they can do it. So you'll have to make the decision as you're doing the assessment. Is this something I'm just going to ask people about, or is this something I'm going to test directly by having them do it? If you know the student well, or your staff know the student well, you could probably complete the assessment by just asking questions. But if you don't know the student well, you might have to directly assess it. And that's basically what this is telling you. So if you were going to directly assess the skill, you would start by presenting them with the task and the materials, and then just see if they can do it. And you would work through the prompts. So this one is question DR1, which would be dressing, question 1. And you can see for this example, they could get a score of 0 through 4. And then you would look at the criteria. And again, this is kind of blown up here for you. So you would actually, this is about putting on a coat, right? So you would give them a coat and say, put it on, and see if they can do it. And then give them a score. So if they could do it, if they could remove it and correctly put it on by doing all the fasteners and everything else, they would get a score of 4. And then on the grid, you would shade in all 4 boxes. If they can remove the coat and put it on, but need maybe a verbal prompt, they would get a score of 3. And then on the grid, you would shade in 3 of the boxes, and so on and so forth. If they can't do it at all, or you can't assess it, you would leave it blank and not fill in anything. Make sense? Okay. And again, we're going to go through and practice this. Certain questions, again, may be difficult or impossible to assess. If that's the case, just leave it completely unshaded. Or just fill in, the highest score. If all you know they can do is a 2, just fill in the 2. If you don't know at all and nobody knows and you can't directly test it, just leave it blank. And again, that's just kind of basically what this slide is telling you. So let's think about some students that you have in your class. I'm going to pick some items from the assessment, and I'm just going to ask you guys, like, whether you would just interview and get a score or whether you would directly test it. So let's see. BC1, basic communication, question 1. Can the learner follow at least 20 different instructions that involve walking to a location and performing an action? The score could be 1 through 4. A 4 would be that they can follow 20 directions. A 3 would be if they can follow at least 10 directions. A score of 2 would be if they can do 10 directions for specific locations. A 1 would be if they can deliver or retrieve specific items from a specific person. So again, those options are in the booklet. They would also be, if you hover over the square on the grid, your options would be there too. So Kristen, would you give that a score just based on your knowledge of the student and asking people questions, or would you directly assess it?
I think, did you?
I'm echoing, I'm sorry.
No, you're okay. That's okay.
I would say I would answer it based on my knowledge of the student, if it's a student that I know very well. But if it was a student that I'm not as familiar with, then we would have to.
Right. So if it's a new student in your classroom, or if it's a new student and it's their 30-day IEP, you might have to actually give them 10 directions and see if they can follow them, and then give them a score. But if you know the student well, or there's other people who know the student well, or a previous teacher or whatever, you could just ask them, hey, can Johnny follow 20 directions? Yes or no, and give them a score that way. So it doesn't have to be exact. It doesn't have to be precise. Again, the general idea is to just say, do they have this skill? And if they don't, is this something then we should make a goal? Make sense? Okay, great. Again, if the score is 0, you circle and, you shade in the circle. If it's a score, and this one shows, so question 1, your options are either 0, 1, or 2, because there's only 2 boxes. Question 2, your options could be 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4, because there's 4 boxes. This individual got a score of 3, so 3 out of 4 of those boxes are shaded in. Okay. So once you've completed the assessment and once you've completed the grid, you would then save it to an approved folder. It will probably be in the shared drive, in the instruction folder, in the assessment folder. We're going to cover that more in the next ICT that we do, about the specifics of how and where you save the completed assessments. We're still working out some of the details for that, because you might not be the teacher the second year, so that second year teacher has to have access to the grid so that they can then add to it in that next color. So we're still working out some of those details. This training was also designed for the org, so different programs in the org are saving them in different places in different ways. So that's why this slide is a little bit more generic. So each program will be determining where the completed grids get saved, and you guys will get that information at the next ICT. So this slide tells you how to access the blank grids. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to share this slide presentation with you guys so that you can then practice this. So give me just a second to go back and share this with you. Katerina, you already have it, so I'm not going to share it with you. I will share it with everyone else. Give me just a second. I am struggling here. Hang on a second. I'm trying to type with one hand and do this at the same time. Okay, so you guys should be getting that momentarily. You can save this to your drive or wherever it's, going to be convenient, because the first few times, some of you might not be actually doing this assessment for a little while. So you want to have reference to these slides later on so that you can go back and if you forget what you're learning today. Did everybody get it? I'm seeing you nod your heads. Okay, good. All right. So the way that you would access the electronic grids is on this slide. So you can see that the 6 different protocols are listed there. If you click on them, there's a link to the electronic grid. And I'm not sure if you're seeing this well, because I don't know with Zoom.
Dawn, do you want us to go into it now?
You can, yeah, if you want to go. I think it's slide 19. So if you guys are like hands-on learners and you have to actually do it to learn it, by all means, yeah, go right ahead. It's loading really slowly. All right, so can you guys see the grid on my screen? Okay. Sort of so. All right, so if you do it yourself, and you can choose any one of the 6, it doesn't matter. So if you click on the link, right, it's going to open as a Google Sheets. We're still trying to figure out whether we're going to do this in Google Sheets or whether we're going to do it in Excel. But right now the training is designed to do it in Excel. So that's, if we need to go back and change this slide later, we will. Yeah, go ahead, Rachel.
I'm sorry, how do I get to the echo? How do I get to this grid?
So
I'm on slide 19.
I believe it's slide 19. I might have the wrong slide number, but it's the slide.
Does it say let's practice?
The one that says accessing blank grids.
Oh, okay.
So you can see there's a step-by-step there. So you click on the title and then click on the link. And that'll open up the grid. Okay. And then once you've opened up the grid, you're going to want to download it. So you should either have a download arrow, or you can see the 3 snowman dots in the upper right-hand corner. You can click on that and then download the grid, and it will download as an Excel file. Again, we're still working on the details of whether or not we're going to use Excel or whether we're going to, but right now it's designed to be used in Excel. And then once you download it, you can save that grid to your drive.
Mine went off snap and it went. When I typed it down.
There might just be like this training is happening like all over the place. There might just be too many people in there at once trying to do it. So you might have to go back and practice on your own, and I'd be more than happy, any of us would be more than happy to kind of sit down with you and go through it individually if you need more help later on, because we only have an hour today to do this. So, but you can see on that slide that says accessing, there's a step-by-step on what to do. So the other issue that you guys have already noticed, you're probably not going to be able to do this on your Chromebooks. It's probably going to have to be done on a desktop. And again, Katarina and her team are going to figure out if there's a way that it can be done on the Chromebooks. And that information will come later at the next ICT. But for right now, for Excel, it can only be done on a desktop. And you guys have probably also already figured out that you can only access Excel through Citrix. So if you're struggling with your behavior data right now, if you're struggling with getting Excel through Citrix, You'll probably also struggle with this. Again, we're working on figuring out the glitches. We're working on figuring out the details. But again, for right now, we just want you to be able to practice doing the assessment. How do you decide what skills to assess? How do you give them a score? The details of filling out the electronic grid will come, but we wanted the focus today to just be to teach you how to do the assessment. All right, I'm seeing some chats popping up here. Oh, okay, some have experience. Okay. All right. So once those glitches are worked out, this would be the slide that you would use to access those blank grids. Okay, and there's step-by-step instructions. And if we need to change these step-by-step instructions, we will, and we'll get that to you guys. All right, but I'm going to go ahead and open one up because I do have Excel on my computer. Being really, really, really slow. But I just want to be able to show you like what it looks like when you hover over the box. There's way too many people accessing this at the same time. Just loading slowly. All right, so can you guys see the grid opened up on my screen? No? All right, I may have to reshare. Hang on. Can you see it now? So this is what the grid would look like. There's other people in there, which is why some of those boxes are already shaded. But this is what the grid would look like when you open it up. And you can see that if I hover over this first box, it tells me what a square of 1 means. If I hover over the second box, it tells me what a square of 2 means. If I hover over, you know, the number, it tells me what skill is being assessed. So again, you can complete the entire assessment if you're once you're familiar with it, just with the grid. You'll know what the skill is. You'll be able to hover over, know what kind of square to give it, and then shaded those boxes. The first few times, you're probably going to want to have the booklet if you're not already familiar with it. Okay, so that's what the next slide also shows you. Let me go back to my slides. So the next slide tells you again, each grid can reflect up to 4 years. Once 4 years have been shaded in with 4 different colors, you would have to start a new grid beyond that. But this slide, the slide before this told you how to access the grid. This slide gives you step-by-step instructions on how to shade in the grid. So you would open the grid sheet, complete the information in the legend, click on the box or circle that you want to shade in. You would have to go to the top and fill it in with that color. So this is just the step-by-step instructions on how to do that as well. So what we want you guys to do now is to go out back to your classrooms in the next couple of weeks and practice doing this, like practice accessing the grid, practice giving the assessment to 1 or 2 of your students. And then when we meet again for the next ICT, you guys will be sharing your grids that you've completed, whether it's the paper or the electronic version. And we'll just kind of talk about how the assessment went, what could be better, what could be worse, and then continue to go on and talk about now what do we do with that information. Right, I'm seeing another chat here. Okay, so thank you, Katerina. So yeah, so it's just practice. So you don't have to complete an entire assessment, right? So you could, if you're not sure, let's say you have a student that you're not sure what their vocational skills are, you could use the vocational assessment and just practice going through like maybe 1 or 2 sections. You don't have to do the whole thing. It's just, again, more about practice. Like, how would you assess it? What score would you give? And then the next time we meet, we're going to review those scores and say, okay, now what would you do with this information? So there's no requirement for which assessment to use. There's no requirement on how many. I would recommend that you would just choose like 1 full section and minimally practice doing that, just so you get a feel for how it works. Any questions? Again, I think once you actually start doing it, it's going to make more sense. It's hard when you're trying to learn just by somebody explaining it to you. But if you get the chance either today or sometime in the next week or so, actually get your hands on a booklet so you can see the specifics of what's in there. If you can make a copy of the paper grid and fill in the paper grid by hand first, that might be easier. But then also try to practice accessing the electronic grid so you can see how what's on the electronic grid corresponds to what's in the booklet. Ideally, we want to go paperless and try to get as many of these done electronically as we can in the future, so that year after year after year, the next teacher has that information. Some of you may recall, you guys are mostly veteran teachers. Some of you may recall, like in the past, when we would do the Brigance, like from year to year to year, as kids move classrooms, those booklets would get lost. We couldn't find them. We didn't really have a way to kind of track their progress year to year to year. So hopefully by doing it electronically, we're going to have more success at doing that. Again, we just need to work out the glitches of that electronic system. So any other questions? You guys feel comfortable kind of just playing around with it and practicing accessing the grids? Go ahead, Stacy.
I just have a question in regards to getting the chance to practice it. What if the opportunity doesn't come up at this time? Things are a little bit too hectic and crazy. Realistically, I don't see how I'll be able to realistically practice.
Yeah, I'm gonna leave
Like,
that up to your supervisors and your lead teachers. Okay. I mean, again, it's beneficial. Like, I know we're in the midst of IEP season right now, and ideally, if you could do some of these assessments now in order to write any upcoming IEPs that you have, that would be ideal. Some of you may not have any upcoming IEPs. Your IEPs may have already been written, in which case you may not have another opportunity to do this until if you get a new student. So the details in terms of the requirements for doing them and the requirements, I'm going to leave that up to your supervisor and your lead. But in terms of just having, go ahead, say that again. I didn't hear you.
I'm sorry, my audio is horrible.
That's okay.
I was just thinking ahead, like to the next ICTs and all that, like so that we're prepared for it. It just might be really challenging.
Yeah, I 100% understand that. But again, maybe talk to your lead teacher. Maybe there's a time, or even if you just go through and like simulate doing one, or just, like say for Johnny, I'm going to just kind of go through. And if you don't have time to do the actual assessment, like direct assessment, if you have a student that really well, that you could fill in a section without having to do anything more than just ask the questions, But again, I'll let you work that out with your supervisor and your lead. Anybody else have any other questions? I'm gonna stop sharing my second so I can see all of you again.
Dawn,
Yep,
which ICT, do you know which ICT when this?
I believe it's the first Thursday in June. I think that's when the next one is, but again, Katerina, do you know if that's accurate? You don't know? Okay.
I'm just, is this the one when there would be an expectation that we would present? Is this the first Thursday in June?
Yeah, we would like you to have at least part of a grid completed, just so we can all kind of look at what you've done, look at your grid, even if it's not the entire thing, even if it's just like maybe one section, just so we can kind of say, okay, well, how did you come up with that score? And then again, be able to kind of move forward and go, okay, so now that we have these scores, what are we going to do with that information? So it's really just about you guys getting the opportunity to practice doing it. The more, I mean, we all know the more we actually do something, the more we're going to learn about it than just kind of hearing about it. So I believe it's the first Thursday in June, but I'm not 100%. We'll have to follow back up with you guys on that one. I'm not as familiar with the ICT schedule, so you can double check with John. All right, any other questions about how to do the assessment, how to determine if you should interview or directly test it, how to find out the criteria for scoring? You guys feel pretty comfortable with all of that? Yep. If not, like I said, you know, reach out to me or any of the other BAs or the leads. We'd be more than happy to kind of sit down with you and go over it again. Katerina, do you know where the actual, do we have any complete full sets anywhere yet?
That would be up to John. I can follow up and then I'll share with you information, Dawn, so you can share with everybody else.
Okay. Okay. I have a full set in my office. If you want to borrow or look at, I can loan them out, but I will hunt you down if any of them go missing. So let me know. Yeah, they're a hot commodity. I don't know why. I think they're probably relatively expensive, which is another reason why we tried to convert as much into the electronic version as possible. We wouldn't have to rely on the booklets. So, all right. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. I'm going to stop recording.